Good morning and welcome to the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known on this Wednesday, January 26, 2022. The relationship between police and the Black community is well documented and remains extremely deadly for African Americans. But what about the Black law enforcement officers? Are they guilty by association? Well, we plan to discuss. We're scheduled this morning to have Ronald Hampton, a retired D.C. police officer and advocate for African American law enforcement nationwide, and David Grogan, a retired US Marshal whose career in law enforcement involved an ugly lawsuit where the hierarchy attempted to fire him because he wouldn't go along to get along. Grogan is also a candidate for sheriff. Also this morning, we're going to welcome community activists Qiana Johnson and Nene Taylor, and of course, Washington Informer journalist and Let It Be Known contributor James Wright, who joins us now to discuss the headlines. Good morning, James Wright.
Stacy. Good morning, Stacy.
Hey, James.
Good to see you.
It's always good to see you. Thanks for joining us again this morning on this edition of Let It Be Known. News headlines this morning, James. First, the mayor of Bridgeport, Connecticut announced Monday that the police department's handling of the investigation into the death of a 23-year-old Black woman found unresponsive in her apartment in December by a man she had met on a Bumble date has been referred to its Office of Internal Affairs for an independent investigation. This comes just days after an attorney for the woman's family said they plan to sue the city over what they described as the police department's racially insensitive handling of the case. And attorney for the family filed a notice of claim last week charging that acting assistant police chief Rebecca Garcia and 3 other officers violated the rights of Smithfield and her family under the 1983 Civil Rights Act, and they failed to provide her and her family with the due process accorded to them under the 14th Amendment. So, James, Smithfield was found unresponsive December 12th in her apartment in Bridgeport by the 37-year-old man who is white. She met him on the dating app Bumble. This is a complete mess, James, as they continue to try and parse this out. The family is definitely suing. The police really appear to have bungled this investigation according to that lawsuit.
You know, the most remarkable thing about these lawsuits and this particular situation is that it keeps happening again and again and again. Stacy, you know what they say, you keep doing the same things over and over and expect a different result. That's the definition of insanity. What's going on in terms of African Americans dying at the hands of police officers unnecessarily for nonviolent offenses, if you want to go that far, is just completely and totally outrageous. This is why it's important that the George Floyd Act be considered and passed by the U.S. Senate and signed by President Biden, so we can make sure that African Americans, indeed all Americans, are protected from rogue police officers. All police officers are not like this, but these incidents just happen to come up. And that's why this one needs to really be investigated by the Connecticut authorities and the U.S. Department of Justice.
Yeah, absolutely. And James, on Tuesday, longstanding concerns about insufficient COVID-19 mitigation in Washington, D.C. schools resulted in scores of disgruntled students to either stay home or leave their respective school grounds during lunch yesterday. Sam Collins of the Washington Informer reported that young people from at least a dozen public and public charter schools participated in the citywide walkout coordinated by Students for Safe Learning, or S4SL, a group of DC public school students who continue to advocate for safer learning conditions now and until the pandemic's end. Affiliates of the movement said their demands include greater transparency about COVID-19 cases, metrics that would determine when schools should transition to virtual learning, weekly testing of the entire student body, and unfettered access to KN95 masks. Some remain frustrated with the dearth of more informative conversations which collectively advise students, parents, teachers, and administrators about the Omicron variant that not only compelled a string of closures in December, but revealed discrepancies about the total number of positive COVID-19 cases. So this is going on right in your backyard, James, and Sam Collins is on the story.
That's right. Sam is on the story. He is our ace education reporter, and this is reminds me a little bit of history. And you've noted that I am somewhat of a historian. It reminds me of the Birmingham when the young people got out in the streets to protest racism and segregation in Birmingham in 1963. It reminds me of Soweto in 1977, protesting the death of Steve Biko. And it's the young people are now taking up this charge in terms of COVID-19. And why not? They're the ones mainly, well, not the main ones, but they're definitely going to be affected by this coronavirus, particularly if it's going to be here for years to come. So I commend Sam's work, and I also commend the young people who are standing up saying that we want better clarity on these COVID-19.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, most recently, James, we talk about student protests. We know the Howard University protests lasted for quite some time late last year. Also in the news this morning, Barry Bonds stands as baseball's all-time home run king with 762 bombs over a career that lasted more than 2 decades. With his fearsome and sweet lefty swing, Bonds also set the single-season home run record with 73 in 2001, a year in which he also drew a mind-boggling 177 walks. What separated Bonds from sluggers like Babe Ruth and others? He probably had the best hand-eye coordination ever. Bonds drew a mind-boggling 2,558 walks over his career, including 626 intentional free passes. So feared was Bonds, pitchers intentionally walked him with the bases loaded. A league MVP 7 times and a Gold Glove winner 8 times. There's little question that Barry Lamar Bonds ranks among the top 5 players in the history of the game. Some even recognize him ahead of Ruth, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, and others as the greatest of all time. But Barry Bonds will not receive the crown jewel of his sport, entry into the National Baseball Hall of Fame. The Baseball Writers of America, the more than 700 journalists who pick Hall of Fame candidates, yesterday snubbed Barry Bonds for the 15th time. This is a tragedy, a travesty, because this is the best player ever. And yet they allege steroid use, and they let people who have been convicted of steroid use, or at least been outed as steroid users, into the Hall. Bonds has never tested positive for steroids, never tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs. James, I think there's something to be said that of the 700 and some odd individuals, journalists who vote for the Hall of Fame, only about 6 of them, 6 are Black. And Barry Bonds has been kept out. During his career, they've used words to describe him as quote unquote surly, quote unquote having a bad attitude, quote unquote not easy to get along with. And so now these writers are getting their revenge against perhaps the greatest player of all time.
Stacey, when I was with the Afro-American newspaper in Washington, I was mentored by Sam Lacey. Sam Lacey was the legendary sports editor at the Afro, and he actually covered Jackie Robinson's season in the 1940s. And one of the things, and also Sam Lacey was also one of the first, if not the first, Black person to join the Baseball Writers Association. They didn't allow a lot of Black people back at that time because they weren't with daily papers. That's what they said. Anyway, but one of the things that Sam Lacey told me is that it's just a good old boys club. And the Baseball Writers is a good old boys club. Now, I imagine that you have a few females who are members of that association. And as you just mentioned, 6 Black people. But it's still a good old boy network.
Almost 750 of these writers who vote for the Hall of Fame. The last count was just 6 Black writers. You cannot tell me that does not factor into this equation here. You have, even if you submit, and a lot of them say, well, he started using steroids in 1999. Well, let's take his numbers up until 1998. 1998, Barry Bonds still had some of the best numbers in the history of the game. He was still undoubtedly the best player. And I submit to you, James, that steroids, the point of these athletes, these baseball players, as we go back to the Mark McGwires and Sammy Sosas of the world, of using it was to be able to hit more home runs, hit the ball further, right? But it does nothing. There's no medical evidence to suggest that any performance enhancing drug makes your hand-eye coordination better, makes you see the ball better. No one saw the ball better than Barry Bonds. It's incredible when you think that the Baseball Hall of Fame is supposed to represent the best of the best, and the best of the best is not allowed entry into the Baseball Hall of Fame. I think it's just asinine, and it just renders. Some of the writers are saying this morning, ESPN, Jeff Passan, who I totally agree with, saying it just renders the Hall of Fame as useless, because if you can't put the best player in, then what does it say about the sport? The player with the most hits in the game ever, Pete Rose, is not allowed in the Hall of Fame either. So what are you going to do? That's sports. That's baseball. Now let's talk about something really serious and more important. The relationship between police and the Black community is well documented and remains extremely deadly for African Americans. But what about Black law enforcement officers? Are they guilty by association? Well, let's discuss that this morning as we bring on, I believe, a police officer, is it David Grogan, is joining us as well, or retired officer Grogan, who is actually, he's a retired US Marshal, and he's running for sheriff, I understand. Good morning.
Good morning, Stacey, and thank you for having me. Good morning, James. Good to see you again, sir.
So let me ask you this. The first thing is this. As we said, with all that's going on, we see the George Floyd situation, the Breonna Taylor. I mean, we can go to Michael Brown. We can run it down, right? We can fill a room with the names of those African Americans who have been victimized by police. Black officers, do you feel that they're guilty by association?
Whoa, Stacey, I have to take a deep breath with this. To be honest and candid with you all, this is a conversation that's long overdue. And thank you for the question. In my opinion, and based on my over 25 years of law enforcement, managing local, state, and federal law enforcement, I do not think Blacks are guilty by association. And unfortunately, and it hurts me to my heart to say it, if you speak to anyone in urban areas, anyone in urban areas will tell you that the reality is Black officers oftentimes are much worse in Black communities than white officers. It hurts me to my heart to share that with you all, but I think we've got to start having these uncomfortable conversations about the reality. These are realities, and you can check with anyone that's in that world, in I guess the street world. They will agree, and I've heard it over and over. In fact, I listened to a young man the other day who was a lifer, and we were having discussions, and he said something to me that I knew. Some of these things I know, but you kind of disconnected sometimes when you're an insider as a law enforcement, especially as a manager. But he said that when Blacks began to be given this level of authority, whether it's police, whether it's prosecutions, whether it's judges, we have done just as much, if not more, damage to our own than white people have ever done. And it almost brought me to tears.
Wow. And it's so refreshing to hear the honesty, because, I mean, we're talking about an experienced law enforcement officer yourself. And you bring up such a great point. And this is a discussion that goes on, behind closed doors, but to have it out in the open out. So you mentioned that Black officers sometimes are perhaps even worse with their own community than white officers. Why is that?
Stacey, it's not as complicated as it sounds. The reason for it is because we have the wrong people in uniform. We have not properly vetted the proper candidates for law enforcement. Law enforcement police work is very, very dangerous, and we don't want to undermine that. And because of the nature of the work, the danger of the work, we have to have the resources, and I'll say maybe law enforcement agencies don't necessarily have the resources to properly vet candidates. Candidates have to, when you're giving a person, sponsoring a person, local, state, or federal, the government is sponsoring the person, and they're giving them a uniform. They're giving them a deadly weapon and giving them broad law enforcement authority. This person has to be properly vetted. After properly vetted, this person has to be properly trained. We have missed the boat on this many, many years ago. I've been saying this for many years, and I've been recruiting officially and unofficially recruiting in law enforcement ever since I was a student at Bowie State. In fact, I recruited my own older brother who still works for the Secret Service. I was a student of the Secret Service, and I was given the opportunity because the director of the Secret Service had faith in me, and he allowed me to select candidates to be considered for the Secret Service. As a student, I recruited young people for the Department of Justice, the US Marshal Service. And certainly when I bring a candidate forward and I put my name on it, I've already vetted that person. But I've watched these processes. I've watched them over and over. I've challenged a lot of things that go on behind the scenes, these elimination processes. I'll give you an example. We could be sitting in a room interviewing candidates, going through thousands of applications. And let's just say you got a speeding ticket. Let's just say Black person has missed a payment on a student loan debt, missed one payment. Any of these things, our applications are being shredded. And then meanwhile, other applicants, because they do things differently, are swept right in. And so this is something that I have fought internally. I am known for addressing that. I can recall times where I'm asking HR people, challenging their decisions. We've got people that are applying to be US Marshals, and there's nothing in their background to indicate that they have any interest in public safety. This person has a master's degree in biochemistry, and they decided to apply to be a US Marshal. Why? Because they can't find a job anywhere else. And then you have people who don't necessarily have experience. They say, oh, we're impressed. Oh, the person has a master's degree in biochemistry. And I said, whoa, I'm not impressed. Wait a minute. I don't see nothing in their background that indicates that they're concerned or they're concerned about public safety. And that's where your problem lies. The recruiting has always been an issue from my tenure in law enforcement.
Well, don't Black officers understand that, look at the color of your skin. You got family, that's the color of your skin. So you're doing to them what the many white officers are doing and will do, regardless of their relationship with you, your son, your daughter, your spouse, your husband, or whatever. They're still their lives are still in jeopardy every time they have an encounter with a police officer. So it would seem to me that a Black officer especially would want to affect some sort of change.
You would think, and so there's another thing. There's a reality here. Law enforcement officers have to be bred from their own communities for them to care. One of the most disheartening things that I had the unfortunate experience of seeing as people coming to Washington, D.C., James, your child in Washington, D.C., because it was easier for them to get into federal government because the cost of living in D.C. is high. So sometimes filling positions in D.C. can be very difficult because the effort's not there. Certainly, there's plenty of people in the Washington, D.C. area that will qualify for these great federal government law enforcement jobs. But ultimately, people have figured out that if I want to get into federal government, all I have to do is go spend a little time in D.C. I can come from Beaumont, Texas, Boise, Idaho, anywhere. I'm going to take a job in D.C. I'm going to get in federal government. Do you really think that these people are going to come to our communities with any care and concern? Absolutely not. They're going to come here. They could care less about the things that you're saying. They're going to terrorize our communities. They're going to write their promotional packages. They're going to get themselves back home within 2 to 3 years after terrorizing our communities. And they're going to go to their community and they're going to police their communities based on what you described, with care and concern that they will never give when you bring people from other places.
Yeah. Well, James, I'm going to throw it to you, but I want to lift up Andrea Connolly's comment. She says most officers are not trained on situations, but are conditioned to situations. And David Youngblood says properly vetted is about preserving the system in place. James, I'm going to throw it to you with that in mind.
I don't know whether to call you David or Officer Grogan, so I'm gonna stick with
David,
David because I've known you for so long.
Yes, sir.
When you were at Bowie State, what type of efforts by law enforcement agencies did they come to a Bowie State in order to get students?
Well, let me think back. What I usually tell young people, most students have no idea about cooperative education. And cooperative education is a program that I took advantage of. And what that does, unlike a co-op program versus an internship, cooperative education program actually pays a student to come in and be an on-the-job trainee. Not only does it pay, if you're successful in your co-op term, which is very short. When I was a co-op student, it was a 2.5 year program. And sometimes you had to even delay your graduation to get your 2.5 or 2 years in. Now they have narrowed it down. I think they can become co-op students in 3 months. And as long as they are successful in their co-op period, when I graduated, I already had a job lined up. I had the choice between being a Secret Service agent or being a Deputy United States Marshal. I chose the Marshal Service. And so, unfortunately, again, sometimes agencies, and let me just say the Marshal Service, because that's where my experience on the federal level, they don't necessarily vet who goes out to colleges and recruit. And so, what I mean by that is it's a buddy system on the black and white side of it. So it's a buddy system that says, oh yeah, I like David. He smokes cigars when he plays golf. David, you can go to Bowie and recruit students today, or go to Howard, or you can go to Jackson State and recruit students. And this is a terribly broken system. And when I say training, I'm talking about if you send somebody out with that responsibility to interview students and recruit students, you have had no training in structured interviewing. You've had no training in vetting. You've had nothing of that. You just go in there with whatever your personality is and just pick who you think is best for whatever reason based on no background and what we should be looking for. And so when I talk about training, I'm also talking about that level of training where where people are given training on how do you psychologically evaluate a person. I dare say I probably had somewhat of a natural gift with this, because I even before in my career, I was one of the facilitators of the Federal Witness Protection Program. And one of the many things that we did was we evaluated mafioso bosses and families, and we essentially made a decision whether this person who was raised in a crime family, that's all they know, that's a whole nother culture. We're going to change their names and we're going to move them from, let's just say, New Jersey to California with a new name. Essentially, what is the likelihood of them going back to crime? And then we make a recommendation to the Department of Justice. Now, certainly this was done in conjunction with a licensed psychologist. But this licensed psychologist that I know I work for personally can tell you that we were probably 100% spot on. He would just ask me, David, what? He didn't even have to do half of his work, because he would ask me, David, what we got here? And I would summarize the situation quickly. And I just think it was a God gift given to me. That's not that common. And so that's the type of training, again, that I'm saying that needs to be given, and the resources have to be there to make sure that people that are going out recruiting and that type of thing have some type of training.
So we've established, we asked the question, were black officers guilty by association? So we established that it's not just that they're guilty by association, but basically that many have that same mentality. So let's go to those who have their boots on the ground. Community activist Nene Taylor, whose focus is to build power collaboratively with marginalized communities while transforming the systems that oppress all Black people, and Qiana Johnson, who works to ensure that Black lives matter in the courtrooms through education, court watch, and supporting systems involve people. Good morning, Qiana and Nene. And say Nene, right? Nene. Okay. There we go. So you're hearing the conversation. We're going to bring the sheriff, the potential sheriff anyway, former officer, retired officer Grogan back as well. But you're hearing the conversation. as someone who's on the ground, you're working every day, you led Black Lives Matter in DC. Tell us what you are hearing from this conversation, particularly as it pertains to what Officer Grogan was saying.
I'm gonna let Qiana go first because I'm like trying to breathe through this because like I almost like just signed off the broadcast, hearing David speak. So Qiana, you want to address this while I take a couple of breaths and be center?
Yeah, good morning. Good morning. So I don't know if I could just start by addressing just David Grogan, but what I will do is I was just taking some notes, and you have to give me the name of the other gentleman that was speaking. I'm
James
sorry.
Wright is the reporter that was on as well.
Yeah, sorry, James. But James, I want to start with James actually before I go into David Grogan. James was talking about, some of the policy that needed to be changed, and he talked about the George Floyd Act. And that kind of was a little triggering to me because that particular George Floyd Justice and Policing Act actually puts $900 million back into the hands of the police. And so whenever I hear people say, that they use George Floyd's death as some type of, they use his death in a way to further their agendas or, do whatever it is that they want to do when it comes to, making a change. And that's not making a change. To put $900 million back into the hands of the police is not changing anything. So I wanted to just actually bring out the BREATHE Act. And I don't know if anybody on the line or anybody listening in has had the opportunity to research the BREATHE Act, right? And I want, because we want to breathe, right? We don't want to not to be able to breathe. We don't want to say we can't breathe. We want to breathe. We have a right to breathe, and we should be breathing, right? And so I want folks to go and research that BREATHE Act and understand that BREATHE Act will divest from the system of policing, the system of policing that was created that said that it was okay to have Black people as slaves, to own Black people as property, right? And that system has not gone anywhere. That system has just evolved to now say that you can call slaves inmates and they can do labor, free labor inside of prison. And we all know that through the 13th Amendment. So just only thing I have to say as far as Grogan is concerned is that we just don't want to talk about Black officers when we talk about this
let me just say this. Today's program, we are talking about whether or not Black officers are guilty by association. Are they? What can they do? Or what should they be doing? What do you see in Black officers? Because should there be more Black officers? Is that part of the answer?
No, it's not part of the answer. First and foremost, before I talk to any Black officers, I want them to read this book. I refuse to have a conversation with a Black officer. You read this book and then we can have a conversation, right? From cover to cover. It's called Locking Up Our Own Crime and Punishment, Blacks in America. And then we can have a conversation. No, having Black officers is not going to get us into any freedom. And, that's not going to, as far as I'm concerned, Black officers fit the description.
Let me jump in, Qiana. So what I want to acknowledge, I appreciate the systems. Actually bringing on Robert Conti, who's a DC native, which I'm also a DC native, right? I personally know Chief Conti, and we had an encounter, and I hear David and I hear Conti, but what I want to tell them that they're not Superman. An individual can't change a system that was never built for us. So therefore, I don't care how many Black people you hire as Black cops, because of what policing is and how it was established, you could never, because you have to do the work of the system and not the individual. So therefore, because you do the work of a system and not an individual, it can never be a good cop. You have good people. And this is what I explained to Conti, right? We have good people in the system. Do we have good cops? No, because a cop got to do what your job is, and that is to enslave the bodies and protect property. of Black and brown people in our marginalized communities. And I've witnessed it time and time again. I don't care how good that you think that that individual is, when he's in those streets, and I experienced it all summer, he's a cop. And I've even actually experienced a cop, a white shirt, push me while he was trying to take Black Lives Matter signs down because it was his job. So I don't believe that there's a thing that if we hire quote unquote good black cops, it's going to change the system. The system doesn't work. It needs to be dismantled and rebuilt and reimagined safety.
So that's the goal, right? Of when we hear defund the police. Am I right? I mean, put me on the right path here, both of you.
Exactly, defunding the police and investing into the communities and the resources that actually keep people safe, right? We're not saying like, you know, right this summer, $43 million went to overtime for policing. Could you imagine how these Black marginalized communities can be empowered if that $43 million went to healthcare, went to our schools, went to jobs, went to mental health, went to drug programs? But no, it went into the hands of policemen to beat, abuse, arrest, and kill Black people. That's what happened with that $43 million. So yes, we need to divest from the police and invest into resources that actually keep us safe. So yes, I am a sound believer in defunding and reinvesting the money where we can keep us safe. I asked them one time before, why can't, instead of putting a cop on that block, put a drug mobile on that block? If we get 2 people to go into that drug mobile, guess what? We're winning. If I say one person and turn one youth life around, I'm winning. I don't have to do 10 in one day. So this is why I do this work. I do this work because if I can save one Black person, then I'm winning.
Yeah. So Qiana, so it's not that you guys are saying anti-police, it's anti-system, right?
Absolutely. We're talking about anti-isms, right? The classism, the racism, the sexism, the capitalism, all of those things that fuels the system is the things that we are anti, right? I think people get tunnel vision and they hear a word like defund and they throws them off track, right? And so like Nene said, what we are here to do is we want to divest. We don't want to put $900 million back into the hands of the police because clearly, as Grogan has stated, you know, the police they're not doing, especially the Black ones, right? That's what he said, that they're even worse than the white ones. So why would we put $900 million back into their hands when they can't respond to a mental health crisis? Right, they can't respond to a crisis.
Drug rehab, drug a problem. They can't respond to that.
So no, we don't.
Yeah, they can't respond to. The policemen are there to protect property. Their job is to protect property and not people. So therefore, what they're responding to, if you want to talk about getting guns off the street, do the data. DC got maybe 2% guns off the street. Like, are we serious? The gun recovery unit, we do numbers, we do facts. So therefore, you got a gun recovery unit, but how many guns did they actually get off the streets? After stopping all these Black people, how many guns did they actually recover? Do the data. Less than 2%. Like, why are you harassing my people? Like, and we're paying you to do it. So therefore, no, a system that was never built for us will never work. I don't care how many Black people you put in place. Just like David want to be sheriff. Like, you literally said what you felt. And reality is, at the end of the day, the system was built upon white supremacy. So you could never change it. I don't care how many individuals you do there. It's a job. And the job is run by white supremacy to enslave, imprison our people. So yes, we are about breaking down those systems of imprisonment, because incarceration, those prisons it's capitalism. It's where the money resides. So therefore, with this system, it's going to always be the oppression of Black people and brown people.
Well, let's bring Officer Grogan back, and as well as Ronald Hampton, a retired DC officer. Good morning, Ronald Hampton, and good morning again, Officer Grogan.
Yes, sir. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
So these young ladies, they are on the ground. They have been in the trenches for so long, and they speak about changing the system. I want your thoughts, Officer Hampton.
Well, good morning, first of all, and I happen to agree with the sisters. I think they make a very valid point. Having been a police officer in this city for 24 years, Police are responsible for providing housing. They're not responsible for providing mental health services. They're not responsible for education in our city. So those issues that government should be providing, the police have been and continue to be a sorry response to those issues. So all of that means to me and has demonstrated to me that there needs to be some restructuring in our system, that the present system we have does not work. And there are better methodologies and methods that we can use to address the issues in our community. But I want to be realistic. Government has to step up and do more than what it's been doing, because it's not by accident that the police were and have been assigned those responsibilities in our society, and they're responding to a neglect and a reaction that government has not provided. And in order for those services to be in our community, I heard the sister mention about having drug treatment centers in the community. Absolutely. You're absolutely right. You shouldn't have, if you live wherever you live, you shouldn't have to catch the subway and a bus to go get some treatment. It should be available in our community. There are other issues that should be available in our community, but that means decentralizing government as well as building capacity in the decentralization process to provide those services. If we're not, then we're talking about having the same old thing over and over again, all we've had all along, and it hasn't worked.
Yeah, and Officer Grogan, you're running for sheriff. Tell us about the run for sheriff. And as far as now, you heard what the young ladies had to say, and they're very, very passionate about it. What kind of change can you affect in that position of sheriff?
Sure. And then I just want to say good to see you, Ms. Johnson. Ms. Johnson and I have met several times and have talked. The ladies provided some real deep insight that I don't necessarily disagree. In fact, is this a broken system? Absolutely. Has this system worked for Black people? Absolutely not. I totally agree. However, law enforcement and social services is just two different entities. And when I think about law enforcement, I actually think about my grandmother or my mother, who could walk down the street and be robbed, young people getting raped, girls getting touched, different things that are criminal behavior. I'm not sure, from my perspective, I'm a law enforcement officer. I understand social services and very sensitive to social services. But I do think that there has to be an effective law enforcement mechanism everywhere, especially in our areas. And when I first started hearing the terminology defund the police, that did raise concern for me, because it sounds to me that, that we could be saying, okay, let's take the police out of our communities. Then the question becomes, how do we manage crime? And so, again, while I don't necessarily disagree with the ladies, and I do feel their passion, and I do agree that this system is broken. I do agree that this system has always been broken. From my perspective, coming from someone that's much more of an optimist, my role as a sheriff is to begin the restructuring of law enforcement. Anyone who has worked for me, and I have managed whites, Blacks, Asians, everything, people know the people at the top set the tone. And I have always had a zero tolerance for civil and human rights violations. And anyone that's worked for me know that. I have never had one complaint lodged against me. I have never had a complaint lodged against anyone working for me. And so I believe that I can't, certainly, as Mr. Ronald said, I can't change, or Ms. Johnson said, one person can't change or fix the world. But I do think that we can start one department at a time. The Prince George's County Sheriff Department, when I'm your next sheriff, we will restructure how we recruit. We will restructure how we vet. We will restructure how we train. We will have sensitivity training. We will have training in mental health. We will not have officers showing up to a scene that's clearly a person that may be in a mental health or some type of mental health episode and being treated as if they're a criminal. We will not have that. And I have faith in a system when you have the person at the top who truly cares about humanity, who truly cares about people.
And so Nene, that would be one department, right? I mean, this does not fix the systemic problem, right?
One department that have to answer to somebody else who's higher than him, which is white supremacy. And so, and I want to acknowledge that I do acknowledge the crime. Not am I a DC native. I am born and raised in east of the river, one of the 37th Street area. So I want you all to understand who I am as a person. And as me, I'm not a product of my environment. No, I'm not a product of my environment, because when I was growing up, I had places to go. It's not nothing. People are shocked at the things I know how to do. I know how to play an instrument. I know how to play the flute. I know how to play basketball. I know how to play football. I know all these things. You know why I know how to know all these things? Because I was able to go to a recreation center and was given free classes to learn how to sew, how to cook. Right, the guys would learn how to do engineering and how to like build boats and little race cars and stuff. That's gone. Our children have nowhere to go right now because the money goes into a system that's not built for us. So therefore, when you talk about crime, yes, we do have rapists and domestic violence people, but guess what? Those are not the ones who's in the jail. Let's be clear. If you do the percentage of the people who commit rape and domestic violence, those people are not holding our jails down. The people who are holding our jails down are people who are committing hard crimes, right? And therefore, majority, and do you know where crime stems from? Poverty. So therefore, let's get rid of poverty, right? And when we get rid of this poverty and invest in our communities, you will see the numbers of the jails go down. But until we dismantle the system that's built for capitalism, this is what's going to keep happening. Being terrorized, our people just coming, and they're going to just keep trying to find ways to arrest our people, because when you arrest our people, it's a number and it's a dollar sign. Even when I get arrested, they make money because I get a number. But I intentionally get arrested. But even though I get arrested, that's why now I don't get arrested, because I don't allow the system to make money off of me. So I do everything in my power not to get arrested, right? Because I'm not going to give them the money to make $50 off of me. You can't even make $50 off of me. That's dumb for me.
And just be clear, when she says getting arrested, in her case, she's talking about because of her activism, right?
That's correct. Me standing for what I believe in.
Exactly. And just wanted to make that clear, because some people watching might think, okay, she's committing crimes. No, that's not the case, folks. It is because of what she stands for. I want to lift up this comment, and Qiana, perhaps you can respond. David Youngblood says, can the system be reimagined within the currently divided population? One side says reimagine, the other says we're not locking up enough criminals, also known as the blacks.
Yes, well, first and foremost, I want to say that for me, I don't use the word crime because it's make-believe, right? Crime is make-believe. It was made up by somebody with power to maintain that power and protect property, right? When we talk about public safety and we use it in a way to fearmonger and talk about when we entered out of the era of war on drugs and we started to do a lot of fear mongering and putting into the people's head that their grandmother may be hit over the head and robbed. What that is that's fear mongering, right? And it's putting a face on quote unquote crime when we know that Black people ain't the only people out here committing crimes, but that is the face that we're putting on these crimes so that we can continue to fear and put fear into our people, right? And as Nene stated, we don't have the resources, our kids don't have the resources that they once used to have. So what else are we going to do? What else is happening out here in the streets, right? And one thing that David said, that he said that he agreed, but not with me, because I don't agree that the system is broken. I want to be very clear that I think that the system is working just fine. I believe that the system is doing exactly what it was set up and intended to do. I do not believe that the system is broken. And that's usually a telltale sign for me when people say that, because they have a belief and a faith in a system that was designed to do exactly what it's doing. And somebody said it earlier about the word insanity. How many years are we going to continue to do the same thing with policing year after year with the hopes that one day somebody will come in and save the policing industry? No, it's not. That has to be abolished. And we have to build something that actually works for Black people, right? That was not designed to kill, oppress, and lock us up. One example that we all know very well is Kyle Rittenhouse, right? Kyle Rittenhouse murdered and killed 2 people in the streets. And he's walking around on our streets today. And I'm going to bring it back a little bit closer. We have a whole police officer inside of Washington, D.C. that murdered and killed, allegedly, Qiana Hilton. And he's out. He went to court, and the judge let him out, and he's at home drinking coffee and waking up every day. No judge thought that he wasn't a danger to society. So we have to first correct the mindset, and we have to do so. We have to invest ourselves to learning and unlearning. And I can't stress enough that before you have a conversation with me, please read this book. And if you please read this book, that's all I'm gonna say. And it actually talks about Prince George's County in this book, where it said an officer on page 106, it said that the black officer that they talked to, he said, "I'm not their soul brother, and I'm not their friend. I'm a policeman." And I'm gonna leave y'all with that.
Well, Officer Hampton, let me ask you this. Paris Brown of the Baltimore Times mentions this, and it goes to what we started with, really. She says our community organization had a discussion about when the PAL, Police Athletic League, was in existence, and the police knew the kids in our neighborhoods. What are your thoughts about this? And it goes back to the black officers and their relationship with the black community too. You're on mute, Officer Hampton.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I just think that the ladies raised a very valid argument. It's just that in our society, you can't stop one thing one day and start doing something else the next day. There has to be conversation. There has to be changes. There has to be adjustments. There has to be some restructuring. And the people who are the recipients, the people in our communities, need to be intricately involved in that discussion. Like the two ladies who's on this program, they need to be involved in that discussion about what is the next system going to look like. Policing in this country has been around for 150 years. And really the professional era started long time ago, over 50 years ago. And the professional era in policing was designed to change policing and professionalize. We're still in that process. Reform hasn't worked. Like the young lady said again, you don't have to do something for 150 years to find out that it doesn't work, and then you keep doing it. That's the definition of crazy or whatever it is.
Insanity.
But the fact of the matter is, we did have those things. But policing in that sense was designed to do certain things. And it was carrying out that function when we had Boys and Girls Clubs, when we had PAL, when we had all of those things. But if you remember, when the money began to be crunched, those were the first units to go, because, again, the system worked right in terms of the identification and the incarceration of people of color. Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, clearly and efficiently articulates that part of what has happened. We have seen that over the years of Black folk being in this country, and it has been very successful. There was a time when, after Reconstruction, that the jails were empty after slavery, and then we saw the jails build back up because we were locking up Black folks. We criminalized certain behaviors, and we're still doing that now. We're criminalizing certain behavior, and then Black folk are the people who get arrested. But the point, James, is that all of that is not going to change if somehow or another that we need to talk with community. We need to talk with those in the profession that are willing to change and be a part of that conversation. And it's like everything else. I often think about this. We're in this period of time where people have grown tiresome of misbehavior on the part of police and the criminal justice system, not just policing, corrections, as well as the courts. And how do we change all of that? And we have to come together and start talking about what it is that we would want to see. This whole idea, for example, let me just say this whole idea of mental health professionals responding to calls for people who have mental health episodes is not new. There are projects going on across the country. One in Portland, Oregon, right now, called Cahoots, where mental health professionals respond to their thing. And they don't respond after the police get there and then call them, they're connected directly to the dispatch system. And so when that call goes out, the mental health professionals respond. If they need the police, they call them. But 9 times out of 10, they don't need the police, because a mental health professional goes to school almost like a doctor, a person who wants to be a doctor, to handle those situations. They don't, 9 times out of 10, they don't need the police. So those are the kind of things we need to be invested in. We don't need police responding to, for example, domestic violence. We don't need police responding to situations around youth. We don't need police, for example, responding to traffic stops. We have civilian units in this city and other cities that handle traffic, as well as movement violations, not just traffic.
So, Officer Hampton, we hear you for sure, loud and clear. We also know that there's some food being cooked. The dog is barking, but let's do this. In the remaining moments, I'll start with retired Marshal Grogan, and then we'll let the ladies conclude. But let's bring it back here. So with the system within the system that we have right now, until it changes, Officer Grogan, until and unless it changes, what should be the role of Black police officers?
Absolutely. The role of Black police officers should be exactly what it was somewhat designed. And Ms. Johnson, I don't disagree that the system is working the way it was designed to work. I do not disagree with that. Black officers should get back to what I believe it was designed to be, is to serve and protect. Serve first. Man, what does serve mean? Serve the community. That's a broad scope. Serve meaning help. Serve meaning respond. Serve meaning serving the community is what stands out most to me, because I know that's what I have done. I've always served in so many different capacities. But then to protect our people from property, as Ms. Johnson mentioned, protect property and let's be candid, and protect people whenever possible from criminal behavior. And I think that when you have the right people who care about humanity, we can get back to serving and protecting versus terrorizing and militarizing, which has happened over the last 20 years.
Yeah, thanks for that, retired Marshal Grogan. And let's bring on James Wright of the Washington Forum for his closing thoughts before we get to our special guests, our two women activists they've been so wonderful this morning and powerful with their thoughts. James?
Well, let me just say that I want to thank the retired officers for coming on and the activists for coming on. This is a discussion that needs to take place throughout the country, and it's a discussion that's not taking place. It is important that Black community, Black leaders engage African-American officers in terms of the behavior, so we can put a stop to this nonsense in terms of Black people being killed for non-criminal offenses. And even if it is a criminal offense, they don't need to be killed. And so I think this is a good discussion that needs to take place in a whole lot of places.
Yeah, and two of the founders of Harriet's Wildest Dreams. Let's start with Qiana. Qiana, your closing thoughts on this?
My closing thoughts on this is that I don't even want to, set our Black police officers up and tell them to go out here and be heroes, because then they end up like the police officers in PG County with a lawsuit and coming to Black Lives Matter and asking, can we help support them? So, it's a setup to kind of tell them to go into a system and be heroes and to kind of like, quote unquote, do the right thing, because there's a system that's larger than them that usually either quiet, silence, or bring them into submission. And so I really, I know you want to have a nice, pretty answer from me on that, but I really don't have one. And I'm not going to sit here and try to, because that's what's going to happen. They'll get themselves killed, or they'll get themselves, it's a bigger system than even them. So I would suggest that you try to find, maybe go back to school and get your degree or something else and do something else. I don't know. That's just my, study law. I don't know. I don't know.
No, we don't. Believe me, Qiana, we're not looking for a prettied up answer, because it's not a pretty issue, right? So, your suggestion to those, it sounds like your suggestion to those who are even considering being a cop, talking about African Americans, be a lawyer or something else, right?
Yeah, our public defenders are really, really low right now. So, I mean, you know, and I'm getting ready to go to law school myself. So, you know, that's
congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we'll leave it to you, Nene.
Yeah. So basically, I just want to explain that we don't talk the talk, we walk the talk, right? So we say defund the police, that's absolutely what we mean. We want to build an infrastructure for a world that's without policing. And by that, what we're doing, we're building this world right now. I want to acknowledge that I am one of the co-founders also and the lead administrator for the DC Mutual Aid Network, where we take care of each other in all 8 wards in Washington, DC. Also, I want to acknowledge that we have I am actually bringing a DC mobilization team here with Raheem.org. You all can look it up, which is a mobilization team where we're going to respond, where we're going to build, where we're going to have therapists and doctors and mental health people, the people who can respond to the situations where we don't want the police, which is a technology, a group that's going to be here, and it's going to be without police. Right, where we're gonna respond to our community needs, where they can, instead of dial 911, they can dial the DC mobilization team, and we're gonna keep them safe. So we're building this world, and we imagine this world, and we are living this world right now without policing.
Yeah, and real quick, Qiana, you talked about going to law school and lawyers. Wouldn't more Black prosecutors help this situation as well, help the system as well?
I was leaving the prosecutors out of it today, but prosecutors are top cops. They are the highest level of the food chain when it comes to law enforcement. And so I don't think people realize that. I think there's a separation of power between the two because, you know, police officers are lower level, badge wearing, gun toting, you know, and they're on the ground. You know, they have rubber bullets and all those things. And prosecutors wear nice clothes and, you know, they go to school and, you know, they get their degrees and become lawyers. But the fact of the matter is that police charge and prosecutors prosecute and indict. So their jobs are one and the same. And so no, for Black prosecutors, you know, my word to you are the same, is that don't get caught up in this system and try to become a hero, because then they'll be coming knocking at your door trying to arrest and put you under too.
Yeah, well, Qiana, Nene, we really appreciate you. Officer Hampton and retired Marshal Grogan, thanks so much. James Wright of the Washington Informer, we really appreciate you. And we appreciate you all for watching this morning. Join us tomorrow for another riveting conversation on Let It Be Known. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.